I'm Ellen. I'm 65 years old, living in a small brick house on a quiet street in suburban Ohio. My husband David and I have been married for 38 years. That's a lifetime, isn't it? Most of those years, he's been gone long hours at the factory, then paperwork at the kitchen table, late into the night. He's a good man, steady kind in his own way. But somewhere along the line, we stopped being partners. We're more like roommates now, sharing a roof, a grocery list, and not much else. I don't blame him. Life has a way of wearing you down, doesn't it? You wake up one day, and the spark you used to chase is just gone. Our son Michael moved out years ago. He's 35 now, living across town with a good job and a life of his own. I'm proud of him. But I miss the noise of him, the way he'd clatter through the door, toss his shoes in the hall, and fill the house with his energy. These days, the house is too still. The clock ticks louder than it used to. I keep busy gardening, knitting the occasional book club, but there's an ache I can't name. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like emptiness, a quiet that settles in your bones when you realize no one's really looking at you anymore. I can't remember the last time David looked at me, really looked. Not at my graying hair or the lines around my eyes, but at me. I'm fine, I always tell myself. I'm fine. But sometimes, when the house is dark and the TV hums in the background, I wish someone would notice I'm still here. Not the mother, not the wife, but Ellen, the woman who used to laugh too loud, who danced in the kitchen to old Motown records, who felt alive. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those chilly October nights when the air smells like leaves and wood smoke. David was working late again, and Michael was out with friends. I'd just finished washing the dinner dishes, my hands still damp from the sink, when I heard a knock at the door. It startled me. Not many people come by unannounced anymore. I dried my hands on a dish towel, smoothed my sweater, and opened the door. There stood Ryan, one of Michael's old friends from high school. He's in his early 30s now, tall and lean, with dark hair that falls just a little too long over his forehead. He's always been polite, the kind of boy who says ma'am and holds the door open. He was holding a worn paperback, one of Michael's old sci-fi novels. "Hey, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice warm against the cool night air. "Mike lent me this a while back. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd drop it off." I smiled, stepping aside. "Come in, Ryan. It's getting cold out there." He hesitated for a second, then stepped into the living room, bringing with him the faint scent of rain and cologne. The house felt different with him in it, not louder, but fuller, like the air had weight again. I gestured toward the couch. "Want some tea? I was just about to make some." He nodded, setting the book on the coffee table. "Sure, that'd be great." I busied myself in the kitchen, filling the kettle, pulling out 2 mugs. It was such a small thing, having someone in the house, but it felt nice, normal. Like the old days, when Michael's friends would pile into the living room laughing and eating all our snacks. When I came back with the tea, Ryan was sitting on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, looking around the room. His eyes landed on a framed photo on the mantel, me and David at Michael's high school graduation, all of us smiling like we had forever. "You guys look happy there," he said, his voice soft, almost curious. I handed him his mug and sat in the armchair across from him. "We were," I said, though the words felt heavier than I meant them to. "It was a good day." I didn't know why I added that, why I felt the need to explain. Maybe because he was looking at me, really looking in a way that made me feel seen for the first time in years. We started talking easy things at first. He asked about Michael, how he was doing. I told him about my garden, how the roses were struggling this year. He laughed when I admitted I talked to the plants sometimes like they could hear me. "That's sweet," he said, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "My mom does that too." The conversation drifted the way it does when you're not watching the clock. He told me about his job. He's a graphic designer, now working on projects he loves, but doesn't always understand. I found myself laughing, really laughing, at his stories about clients who changed their minds every other day. It felt good, like stretching a muscle I'd forgotten I had. The room grew warmer, the tea mugs empty on the table. I should have glanced at the clock, should have said something about it getting late, but I didn't. There was something about the way he listened, the way he leaned forward just a little, like every word I said mattered. I hadn't felt that in so long, too long. Then, as I was telling him about a trip David and I took years ago, he tilted his head, his eyes catching the light. "You know, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice quieter now, "you've got this glow when you talk about the things you love. It's nice." I froze, my breath catching. It was such a simple thing to say, but the way he said it, the way his eyes held mine for a moment too long, it felt like more. My cheeks warmed, and I looked down at my hands twisting the hem of my sweater. "Oh, I don't know about that," I said, trying to laugh it off. But my heart was beating faster, and I wasn't sure why. I thought I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into a kind word from a kind boy. But as he leaned back, still watching me, I felt something shift inside me, like a door creaking open, just a crack. I never expected a simple visit like this, a few minutes of conversation, to stir something I thought I'd buried long ago. And yet there it was, a flicker of something dangerous, something I wasn't sure I could name. I cleared my throat, standing to take the mugs to the kitchen. "More tea?" I asked, my voice a little too bright. He shook his head, but his eyes didn't leave me. And as I turned away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this ordinary evening, was about to change everything. The kitchen light felt too bright as I stood at the sink rinsing the tea mugs. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was racing. Ryan's words, "You've got this glow," kept echoing, each syllable heavier than the last. It was just a compliment, I told myself. Just a kind thing to say. But the way he'd looked at me, his eyes steady and warm, had stirred something I hadn't felt in years. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to feel. I glanced at the clock, nearly 9. David wouldn't be home for hours, and Michael was out who knows where. The house was so quiet, except for the faint creak of the couch where Ryan sat in the living room. I dried my hands and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the flutter in my chest. "Get a grip, Ellen. He's Michael's friend. He's half your age." I walked back to the living room, determined to keep things light, to steer the conversation back to safe ground. But when I saw him leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his gaze flicked up to meet mine, and my resolve wavered. There was something in his expression, curiosity, maybe, or something deeper, that made the room feel smaller, the air thicker. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice low, like he could sense the shift in me. I forced a smile, sitting back in the armchair. "Oh, fine. Just didn't realize how late it's getting." I gestured vaguely toward the clock, hoping he'd take the hint, but he didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head, studying me. "You seem different tonight, Mrs. Carter," he said. "Not in a bad way, just, I don't know, like you're carrying something heavy." His words hit like a stone, dropping into still water. I opened my mouth to brush it off, to say I was fine like always. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, like he actually wanted to know. Like he saw past the gray hair and the tired eyes to the woman I used to be. When was the last time someone asked me how I was and meant it? David and I barely talked anymore, not about anything real. And Michael, he loved me, but I was just mom, the one who sent him care packages and worried too much. I'm okay, I said finally, but my voice was softer than I meant it to be. It's just quiet around here sometimes. You get used to it. He nodded like he understood more than he should. Quiet can be loud though, can't it? Like it's screaming at you to notice it? I laughed, a small surprised sound. That's exactly it. I didn't think anyone else would get that. He smiled, and for a moment, the tension eased. We started talking again about little things, his latest design project, the way he'd always loved Michael's stories about our family. But the conversation kept circling back to me. He asked about my garden, my book club, even the music I liked. Simple questions, but the way he listened, hanging on every word, made them feel like more. I found myself telling him things I hadn't said out loud in years, how I used to sing along to Aretha Franklin in the car, how I'd always wanted to take a painting class, but never did. Stupid small dreams I'd tucked away long ago. The clock ticked on, but I didn't care anymore. The room felt hazy, like we were in our own little world. He leaned closer, his hands clasped in front of him, and I noticed the way his fingers moved restless, like he was holding something back. My own hands were fidgeting, twisting the edge of my sweater again. I should have stopped, should have stood up and said goodnight. But I didn't. I wanted to stay in that moment, in the warmth of being seen. Then he said it. You know Mike's lucky to have you. You're different. Warm, real. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were locked on mine intense, in a way that made my breath catch. Not everyone has that. My heart thudded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His words were like a match striking in the dark, lighting up something I'd tried to keep buried. Warm, real. When was the last time anyone called me that I felt a rush of something gratitude maybe, or something more dangerous, something that made my skin prickle and my stomach twist? Thank you, I whispered, barely audible. I felt exposed, like he'd peeled back a layer I didn't even know I had. My hand rested on the arm of the chair, and as he shifted his fingers, brushed against mine just for a second, just enough to send a jolt through me. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. I should have. I know I should have. Are you happy, Ellen? He asked suddenly, his voice so soft it was almost a whisper. He leaned forward closer now, and the way he said my name, not Mrs. Carter, but Ellen, felt like a line being crossed. His eyes searched mine, and I felt like he could see every crack, every ache I'd hidden for years. I froze, happy. The question was so simple, but it tore through me. Was I happy I had a good life? A house, a family, a husband who didn't hurt me, but happy I didn't know anymore. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat felt tight, my thoughts a jumble of guilt and longing. I wanted to tell him the truth, to spill it all, the loneliness, the emptiness, the way I felt invisible. But I couldn't. It was too much, too raw. Instead, I stood up, my legs shaky. It's late, I said, my voice trembling. I need to get some things done. It was a lie, and we both knew it. He stood too, stepping closer, and for one dizzying moment, I thought he might reach for me. I backed away, not firmly, just enough to keep the distance between us. My heart was pounding, torn between wanting to run and wanting to stay. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said, his voice gentle, but laced with something I couldn't name. I see you, Ellen. That's all." Those words broke something in me. I see you. They were everything I'd wanted to hear, everything I'd been starving for. But they were wrong. They were dangerous. I turned away, my hands gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. "You should go," I said, but it came out softer than I meant, almost like a question. He didn't move right away. The silence stretched heavy with everything we weren't saying. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, teetering between who I was and who I might become if I let myself fall. In that moment, I didn't know what was pulling me back or pushing me closer. All I knew was that I was alive again, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. The living room felt like it was closing in, the air too thick to breathe. Ryan stood there just a few steps away, his eyes still on me, waiting for something I wasn't sure I could give. My words, "You should go," hung between us, fragile and unconvincing. My hands trembled against the back of the chair, and I gripped it harder, anchoring myself. I wanted to look at him, to see that intensity in his gaze again, but I kept my eyes on the floor, on the worn patch of carpet where Michael used to play with his toy cars. This was my home, my life. I couldn't let it unravel over a moment, no matter how alive it made me feel. "Ellen," Ryan said, his voice soft but steady, like he was trying to pull me back to him. I didn't mean to push. I meant what I said. "You're special. Mike's always said it. But seeing you tonight, I get it." My heart twisted, a sharp ache that was equal parts guilt and yearning. Special. The word was a lifeline and a trap all at once. I wanted to believe it, to let it fill the hollow spaces David's absence had carved out over the years. But it wasn't right. It wasn't fair to David, to Michael, to myself. I shook my head, forcing a small, shaky laugh. "You're sweet, Ryan, but I'm just me. Nobody special." He took a step closer, and my breath caught. "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. "You don't see it, but I do. The way you talk, the way you care, it's rare. You deserve to know that." His words were like a wave crashing over me, pulling me under. I felt dizzy, untethered, like I could float away on the strength of his belief in me. For one reckless moment, I imagined it, letting him stay, letting the conversation drift into something more, letting myself be the woman he saw instead of the one I'd become. My eyes flicked up to his, and the warmth there, the certainty, made my resolve waver. His hand reached out, hovering near mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of it. I don't know what would have happened if the phone hadn't rung. The sharp trill cut through the haze, jolting me back to reality. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and turned toward the kitchen. "I should get that." I mumbled, my voice barely audible. Ryan nodded, his hand dropping to his side, but his eyes didn't leave me as I hurried to the counter and picked up the receiver. "Hello." My voice cracked, and I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal. It was David, his voice tired but familiar, saying he'd be home in an hour, asking if I needed anything from the store. I murmured something about being fine, my eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, afraid to look back at Ryan. When I hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. I turned around, and Ryan was standing by the couch, his jacket in his hands. "I should head out," he said, his tone careful, like he was testing the waters. "Didn't mean to keep you so long." I nodded, my throat tight. "It's okay. Thanks for bringing the book back." The words felt hollow, a weak attempt to pretend nothing had happened. I walked him to the door, my steps slow, like I was moving through water. He paused in the doorway, the cool night air slipping in, carrying the scent of rain again. Ellen, he said, turning to face me. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought he might say something else, something that would make it impossible to close the door. But he just smiled a small, sad curve of his lips. Take care, okay? You too, I whispered. I shut the door behind him, locking it with a click that felt final. The house was quiet again. Too quiet, the kind of silence that screams. I leaned against the door, my legs weak, and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands. What had I done? Nothing, not really. We hadn't touched, hadn't crossed any line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I'd wanted to. God help me. I'd wanted to. The memory of his eyes, his voice, the way he'd said my name, it burned through me, leaving shame and longing in its wake. I felt like I'd betrayed David, even if I hadn't. I felt like I'd betrayed myself. I sat there for a long time, the clock ticking in the background. Each second, a reminder of the life I'd built. David would be home soon, and he'd walk through that door, hang up his coat, and ask about my day. Like always. He wouldn't know how close I'd come to something I couldn't take back. He wouldn't see the storm inside me, the way Ryan's words had woken something I thought was dead. No one had looked at me like that in years, and now that they had, I didn't know how to go back to being invisible. I thought about the photo on the mantel, the one Ryan had noticed me, and David smiling at Michael's graduation. We'd been happy then, hadn't we? Or at least we'd been together, building something worth keeping. But somewhere along the way, I'd started to disappear, fading into the background of my own life. Ryan had seen me, really seen me, and it had felt like coming up for air after years underwater. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I stood up, my knees, aching, and walked to the living room. The paperback Ryan had returned was still on the coffee table, its corners worn from years of being loved. I picked it up, tracing the title with my finger, and set it on the shelf where it belonged. Then I sat on the couch, staring at the empty armchair, where I'd been just an hour ago, laughing, feeling alive. I didn't know what made me tremble, fear, shame, or sorrow. Maybe all of it. I'd almost lost something tonight, but maybe I'd saved something too. From that day on, I understood something I hadn't before. It only takes one look, the right one, to wake something you thought was gone. But that feeling, that rush, it's not worth the cost. I didn't tell David what happened, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to protect what we had, even if it wasn't perfect. I'd lived too long like a shadow in my own house, but I wouldn't let one moment define me. I was still Ellen, still a woman, still here, and maybe that was enough. If you've ever felt invisible, like I did, hold on to who you are. Don't let a kind word from the wrong person make you forget what matters. Stay strong and keep watching for more stories that remind us we're not alone.